The house was too quiet for a Sunday afternoon. Laura felt it the moment she stepped inside, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears and made her slow down without knowing why. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows, steady and patient, as if waiting for something to happen. She set her keys on the counter and listened. No TV, no music. Just the low hum of the heater and the faint sound of running water upstairs. She hadn't expected anyone to be home. Mark's car wasn't in the driveway when she arrived. Husband had said he'd be out all day, helping his friend renovate a small rental property across town.
Cool.
Laura had planned to grocery shop, maybe call her sister, and spend the evening alone. That was the plan. But the sound upstairs told her the plan had already changed. She took off her coat slowly and walked toward the stairs. Each step creaked in a way she had learned to hate over the years. She told herself it was probably nothing. Maybe Mark had come back early. Maybe he'd forgotten something. Still, her chest felt tight as she climbed. The bathroom door at the end of the hallway was half closed. Steam drifted out, warm and heavy, carrying the sharp smell of soap and something deeper, unfamiliar. Laura stopped a few feet away. She could hear movement inside, not rushed, not careless, calm to calm. She knocked once, lightly. The sound inside stopped. A pause followed, long enough to make her breath hitch. Then the door opened just a few inches. It wasn't Mark. Ethan stood there, one hand gripping the edge of the door, his hair damp, his face pale with shock. He wore a towel around his waist, nothing else. For a second, neither of them spoke. The moment stretched thin, fragile, like glass about to break. Ethan was Mark's best friend. He'd been for over 20 years. It was practically family. Or so Laura had always believed. Ethan started, then stopped. His eyes flicked down the hallway, then back to her face. I didn't know you were coming back this early. Laura's mouth opened, but no words came out. She felt heat rush to her face, not from embarrassment, but from confusion. Her mind scrambled to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. What are you doing here? She asked finally. Her voice sounded steady, but it didn't feel that way inside. Ethan swallowed. Mark asked me to stop by. He forgot some tools. In the shower. She asked. He looked down, then back up, his jaw tightening. The rain. I got soaked. He said it was fine. Laura nodded slowly, though nothing about this felt fine. Mark wasn't the kind of man who let people wander through their house like that. He was private, careful, and Ethan knew that. I'll be out in a minute, Ethan said. I'm sorry. Laura stepped back, giving him space. Take your time. The door closed gently, too gently. Laura stood there for a moment, then turned and walked downstairs. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to move normally. She sat on the couch and stared at the blank television screen, replaying the moment in her head. She told herself she was overthinking. She had always been good at that. When Ethan came downstairs, he was fully dressed, his hair still damp, his movements stiff and careful. He avoided her eyes at first, then seemed to change his mind. Laura, he said softly, I didn't mean to make things awkward. She looked up at him. It's just unexpected. He nodded. I'll head out. He reached for his jacket, then hesitated. Mark should be home soon, okay? She said. Ethan lingered for a second longer, as if he wanted to say something else. Then he left. The door closed behind him with a quiet final sound. Laura sat there long after he was gone. That night, Mark came home late. He kissed her cheek, talked about traffic, complained about the rain. He didn't mention Ethan, not once. Laura watched him closely as he moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, pouring water, acting like everything was normal. She waited for the moment when he would say something, anything, that explained the afternoon. It never came. You're quiet, Mark said eventually. Just tired, she replied. He nodded and went to bed early. Laura stayed up, scrolling through her phone without reading anything. Her thoughts kept circling back to the bathroom door. the steam, the look on Ethan's face. Over the next few days, things shifted in small, almost invisible ways. Ethan started coming around more often, always with a reason, dropping something off, picking something up, helping Mark with a project. Laura noticed how his visits never happened when Mark wasn't around anymore. She also noticed how careful Ethan was to keep his distance from her, how his eyes avoided hers, how tension filled the room when they were alone for even a moment. That tension began to change. It started with brief conversations in the kitchen. Simple things, weather, work. Then longer ones, when Mark stepped outside to take a call or ran to the garage. Ethan's voice softened during those moments. He asked Laura how she was doing. Really doing? You seem different lately, he said one afternoon. She shrugged. Life, I guess. He studied her face in a way that made her uncomfortable, but also seen. You deserve more than just getting through the days. The words lingered after he left. Laura tried to pull back. She reminded herself who he was, what lines should never be crossed. But something had already cracked open inside her. She felt lonely in a way she hadn't admitted before. Mark had become distant over the years, more focused on work, less interested in conversations that went deeper than schedules and bills. Ethan noticed things Mark didn't. When she cut her hair, when she seemed sad, when she laughed for real. One evening, Mark asked her to drop off a folder at Ethan's place. Laura hesitated, then agreed. She told herself it meant nothing. Ethan opened the door with a surprised smile. Didn't expect you. I won't stay, she said quickly. But he stepped aside and she went in. They talked. Too much. About old dreams. About regrets. About moments when life quietly turned in a direction no one planned. The air between them felt heavy again, familiar now, almost expected. When Laura stood to leave, Ethan walked her to the door. They stopped too close. Neither moved. This isn't a good idea, Laura said. I know, Ethan replied. Their eyes met, and for a split second, everything else disappeared. Laura stepped back first, her heart pounding. She left without looking back. That night she lay awake beside Mark, staring at the ceiling, knowing that something had already changed. She didn't know where it would lead, only that she was standing at the edge of a choice she wasn't ready to name. And somewhere across town, Ethan sat alone in his dark living room, replaying the same moments, realizing that the door Laura had opened that afternoon could never be fully closed again. The next morning, Laura woke to sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor. Mark was already gone, leaving the house quieter than usual. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, thinking about yesterday's bathroom door, the tension, Ethan's voice, lingering in her head. She had tried to convince herself it was just coincidence, a series of harmless interactions. But she knew it wasn't that simple. Something had shifted. Something she couldn't ignore. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of coffee and toast. Laura poured herself a cup, her hands shaking slightly despite her attempts at calm. The day ahead was supposed to be ordinary, errands and paperwork, nothing unusual. But her phone buzzed, with a message from Ethan. Do you have a moment to talk today? Her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, then typed back. Sure, when? Minutes later, Ethan was at the door carrying a small box. He looked different somehow, more tense, more serious. He didn't smile as he usually did. Instead, he stepped inside and set the box on the table. I found these while cleaning up Mark's garage, he said quietly. I thought you might want them. Laura opened the box. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a few trinkets she hadn't seen in years. Memories flooded her moments from her past, some happy, some painfully bittersweet. I can't believe you kept these, she whispered, her voice caught. I thought you'd like to see them, Ethan replied. His eyes lingered on hers a moment too long. and she looked away, feeling heat rise in her chest. They sat in silence for a while, flipping through the photographs, sharing stories she hadn't told anyone else. With every memory, a connection deepened. It wasn't physical at least not yet, but the emotional weight between them was undeniable. Suddenly, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at it, then made a decision. "I need to take this," he said. He left the room, leaving the door slightly open. Laura felt a pang of loneliness, a strange emptiness now that he was gone, even for a few minutes. She hadn't realized how much his presence had already begun to affect her. When he returned, there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "Laura," he said, almost whispering, "I can't stop thinking about yesterday, about us talking. I shouldn't, but I do." Laura's pulse quickened. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. "Ethan, we have to be careful." "You know that, I know," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low, deliberate. "But being careful feels impossible when I'm around you. I can't act like nothing is there." Her hands trembled as she clutched the photographs. "This isn't right. You can't let this go further." He stopped, just a few feet away, his expression a mix of frustration and longing. "I'm not asking you to. I need you to know how I feel. That's all." The tension in the room was suffocating, but Laura didn't move. She realized she was waiting, almost expecting something, an explanation, an apology, or perhaps a moment of clarity. But Ethan only looked at her eyes steady, as if searching for permission she couldn't give. Later that week, Mark was gone for an entire afternoon, and Ethan stopped by under the pretense of dropping off some tools. Laura felt the pull immediately when she opened the door. His presence filled the room. They ended up sitting together, on the couch, talking for hours about life, regrets, hopes, and the paths that had led them here. At one point, Ethan reached out to touch her hand lightly, just brushing his fingers against hers. Laura's breath caught, and she pulled her hand away instinctively. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "I know," he said softly, letting his hand fall back to his lap. I wanted to feel that for a second." The moments between them became more frequent and more intense. Everyday interactions carried unspoken words, fleeting glances, and accidental touches. Laura found herself thinking about him at night, replaying conversations in her mind, wondering if he felt the same. One evening, while Mark was out late at work, Laura found herself alone with Ethan again. They were in the kitchen, preparing tea, and for a moment, the room was filled with a kind of quiet intimacy that was impossible to ignore. "I don't want to complicate things," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. "I know," Ethan replied. He looked down at his cup, then back up at her. "But sometimes life isn't about being careful. Sometimes it's about recognizing what's real." Laura felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to argue, to insist that their connection was nothing more than friendship. But she couldn't. There was an undeniable pull, a sense of understanding, and shared experience that Mark had long stopped providing. Days turned into weeks, and their interactions continued. Laura noticed subtle changes in herself. She laughed more when Ethan was around, found herself eagerly anticipating his visits, and dreaded the moments when he had to leave. The tension was constant, simmering just below the surface, a mix of desire and guilt that she couldn't shake. One rainy afternoon, Ethan showed up unexpectedly, drenched from the downpour. Laura offered him a towel, and as he dried his hair, their hands brushed accidentally. The contact sent a shock through both of them, and they froze, eyes locking. "We can't," Laura said, her voice barely audible. "I know," Ethan replied, his own voice strained. "But that doesn't stop anything, does it?" The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her. She wanted to deny it, to push him away, but every instinct screamed in the opposite direction. There was something between them, undeniable and dangerous, and for the first time in years, Laura felt truly alive in a way she hadn't with Mark. Later that night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Ethan's words, his presence, the tension between them, everything played over and over in her mind. She didn't know where this was going or what she was willing to risk. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Ethan texted her. "We need to talk. Can you come over?" Laura stared at the message, her heart racing. She knew that whatever happened next could change everything: her marriage, her life, her sense of self. But she also knew she couldn't pretend the feelings weren't there anymore. She took a deep breath, picked up her keys, and stepped out into the rain, knowing that the next conversation would force a choice she had been avoiding. The tension, the longing, and the questions about what she truly wanted were all coming to a head, and there was no turning back. As she drove to Ethan's house, the rain pounding on the windshield, she realized that life had handed her a moment she couldn't ignore. Everything had changed the day she caught him in the bathroom. And now, every decision, every heartbeat, was charged with the possibility of something new, something that might be worth the risk, even if the outcome was uncertain. By the time she reached his door, the storm had subsided. The air smelled fresh and clean, but inside, Laura felt the storm still raging. She knocked. Ethan opened the door, looking as tense and vulnerable as she felt. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. Laura nodded. "We need to figure this out, one way or another." Ethan stepped aside to let her in, and as the door closed behind them, she knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Whatever happened next would define the rest of their lives, and there was no going back to how things used to be. The rain had stopped outside, but inside, hearts raced and emotions surged. Choices had to be made. Lines had been crossed. Feelings had been awakened. And the quiet house that had once felt safe and familiar now pulsed with tension, anticipation, and the possibility of love that was both thrilling and dangerous. Laura and Ethan faced each other, each waiting for the other to speak, knowing that the next words could change everything forever. And in that silence, thick with longing and uncertainty, Laura realized that life rarely offered second chances so clear, so immediate, and so impossible to ignore. The story wasn't over. It had only begun.